The private dining suite on the 42nd floor was designed to make people forget the world existed below it. Soft amber lighting, walls veneered in dark walnut, and a single oval table dressed like a negotiation altar. At its head sat Khalid al-Rashid, a Gulf billionaire whose decisions could bend markets before lunch. Tonight, he was minutes away from signing a $240 million acquisition contract, an agreement that his entourage whispered would cement his legacy. He wasn't listening to any of them. His attention had drifted to the young woman refilling crystal water glasses. She moved quietly, almost rhythmically, as if trying to make herself invisible. The staff badge on her apron read, Mira. No last name. The lead advisor tapped the folder, encouraging the sheikh to sign. Everything is prepared, sir. A flawless investment. Khalid uncapped his lacquered pen, the gold nib glinting under the chandelier. That was when Mira paused behind him, just long enough to see the open contract lying in front of him. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her eyes narrowed on one particular page, the way someone recognizes a face in a crowd they hoped never to see again. One of the men noticed her staring. He snapped at her in a clipped Gulf dialect, dismissive, condescending, ordering her to move, to stay in her place. The room froze for half a second. Mira lowered her eyes, swallowed, and whispered, in flawless classical Arabic. 4 words that fell with the weight of a verdict. This is not correct. The pen stopped. A pulse of irritation crossed the billionaire's jawline. His advisors looked at her as though a mosquito had dared interrupt a coronation. But she did not repeat herself. She simply stepped back into silence, every nerve in her body vibrating with fear. Yet something in her gaze suggested she had seen a danger no one else had even bothered to look for. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. For a moment, the room held the kind of silence that doesn't simply fall. It tightens. Khalid al-Rashid shifted in his chair, the insult he had hurled at her still hanging in the space between them. It had been sharp, delivered in a clipped Gulf dialect, the sort used for staff you expect not to answer back. Except she had answered back. And not in the everyday regional speech he expected from a waitress. She had spoken classical Arabic, clean, disciplined, illuminated by centuries of linguistic architecture. The kind of Arabic reserved for scholars, for courts, for solemn declarations. It unsettled him. Who trained the staff to interrupt negotiations? One advisor muttered. Another added, she probably misunderstood. They always misunderstand. But Khalid's irritation shifted into something more cautious. Her tone hadn't been dramatic, not alarmed, not even pleading, just accurate, like someone identifying a misfiled archive document at a museum. He looked toward the door she had slipped through, replaying her micro-expressions. No panic. Just the rigid, contained fear of someone who had seen something she shouldn't have. He capped the pen, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. Bring her back, he said. The advisors exchanged glances. Sir, she's staff. We don't... I said bring her back. 2 minutes later, Mira stood near the doorway again, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, her breath shallow. The dining suite seemed brighter now. Or perhaps her shame made every surface feel like a spotlight. She avoided everyone's eyes, especially his. What exactly, Khalid asked, voice controlled, did you think was not correct? She hesitated. She knew her place, knew the consequences, knew her contract as a server could be terminated before the hour ended. I wasn't speaking to you, sir, she murmured. I was speaking to myself. A lie, but her only shield. One advisor scoffed. She's afraid. Let's continue. But Khalid did not pick up the pen. Instead, he studied her posture, the restrained tremor in her fingers, the way she pressed her nails against her palm as if grounding herself. Something in this young woman did not fit her uniform, and something in this contract, he now suspected, might not fit his future. Truth often arrives quietly, disguised as the person everyone overlooks. Mira stood near the wall, the way people do when they're trying to become part of it. The suite's luxury made her feel smaller, as though the walnut panels themselves were judging her presence. She kept her eyes lowered, but her mind was racing, trying to calm the panic rising in her throat. She hadn't meant to speak. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear. Her entire existence was built on silence. Before this job, Mira had lived in a cramped studio with water stains on the ceiling and 2 locks on the door, neither of which made her feel safe. Her student visa had lapsed after she dropped out of her linguistics program, debts piling like sediment she couldn't escape. She had once dreamed of becoming a philologist, specializing in ancient manuscript authentication. Instead, she now served cocktails to men who never learned her name. Invisibility had become her armor. She showed up early, stayed late, said little. When managers asked about her accent, she deflected. When customers mocked her, she apologized. When wealthy clients flirted or barked orders, she smiled without letting her real thoughts surface. Her life outside work was a rotation of bus rides, discount groceries, and a single worn notebook filled with notes she still took out of habit. Linguistic anomalies, ink patterns, dialect shifts, marginalia behaviors. She didn't know why she kept studying. Hope was a muscle she hadn't used in years. Tonight was her worst nightmare. She had been noticed, and for the wrong reason. She felt every gaze pressing against her. The billionaire's advisors looked at her like a problem to be dismissed. The contract on the table seemed to vibrate, as if calling her back to the mistake she had spotted. But she couldn't let them know. She needed this job. She needed the income. She needed to stay invisible. She clasped her hands tighter to hide the tremor. "Stand by the side," one advisor told her. "We need staff present until the presentation concludes." She obeyed, stepping to a corner where shadows softened the edges of her fear. She didn't understand why they insisted she remain for the negotiation, but refusal wasn't an option. She lifted her chin just enough to see the folder lying open. Her pulse spiked. There it was, the clause she had glimpsed. One line that didn't belong. One line that could cost the man at the table everything. She inhaled, barely. Sometimes survival means pretending you didn't see the danger, even when you know it's about to erupt. They dimmed the lights as if this were theater, not a negotiation that could redraw a fortune. A projection screen descended with a soft mechanical sigh, and the lead consultant, a polished man with precise hand movements, stepped forward to begin the formal pitch. Mira stayed behind him, half-shadowed, her tray set aside. She wasn't supposed to listen. She wasn't supposed to understand. But she understood every word. "Tonight," the consultant began, "you are acquiring a controlling share of a historic restoration conglomerate. A portfolio valued conservatively at $240 million. He clicked to the first slide. Ornate buildings, archival images, carefully curated success stories. The advisors nodded. Khalid leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Mira, meanwhile, scanned every corner of the documents on the table. Her eyes had adjusted to the low light. Her mind had slipped instinctively into the academic mode she had forced herself to abandon. Margins, seal placement, pagination rhythm. Clause sequence. She felt a chill. They had structured the pages to mimic a standard acquisition contract. But one page carried the wrong texture, the wrong tonal hue under the chandelier. The paper looked correct to the untrained eye, but she knew the difference between vellum finish composites and high-grade archival fiber. The suspicious page was slightly too glossy, and printed with a marginal spacing that did not appear anywhere else in the document. She looked away quickly before anyone noticed her gaze. Here, the consultant continued, moving to a slide of projected revenue streams. You can see the guaranteed returns outlined in Appendix E. Guaranteed. Her jaw tightened. The clause she had glimpsed earlier. It mentioned a stability guarantor, an entity name she didn't recognize. Whoever that guarantor was, their wording made no legal sense. No legitimate contract used phrasing that vague, unless the intent was to misdirect. But she said nothing. The consultant advanced to diagrams of ownership trees, describing them with the confidence of someone who assumed the audience would never check the roots. Khalid's advisors murmured approval. Everything aligns. Clean structure. Timely opportunity. The billionaire, however, kept glancing at Mira, not accusingly, curiously, like a man replaying an earlier moment in his mind, trying to decode why a waitress had spoken like a constitutional scholar. Mira felt his eyes on her, and her chest tightened. She dropped her gaze again, fingers curling inwards, nails pressing crescent moons into her palms. She had made a mistake by speaking. A worse mistake by looking at the contract. She should have walked away. She should have stayed invisible. But every slide in the presentation sharpened her anxiety. The numbers were too perfect, the projections too linear. The legal summary too rehearsed. Someone had spent a lot of time constructing confidence. Confidence was always the prettiest disguise for a trap. She exhaled slowly. Sometimes danger announces itself not through noise, but precision. The next team entered like a procession. 3 analysts, a legal architect, and a valuation specialist whose suit alone cost more than Mira's annual rent. They arranged themselves around the billionaire, as though forming a protective ring, each carrying binders, tablets, thick portfolios with textured covers meant to signal seriousness. "Sir," the valuation specialist began, "we've conducted parallel verification. Everything in this acquisition is rock solid." Rock solid. The phrase hit Mira like a warning bell. Experts rarely used absolutist language unless they wanted to shut down scrutiny. The legal architect slid a folder forward. "Our firm reviewed the binding clauses. No anomalies, no latent liabilities, no risk transfer mechanisms hidden in subclauses." He spoke with the calm arrogance of someone confident his words would never be questioned. The analyst beside him added, "The guarantor entity listed is standard in restoration conglomerates. Perfectly routine." Mira stiffened. Routine was the one thing that entity was not. She recognized the name from an old case study she'd read before her life collapsed. An entity dissolved 8 years ago after a scandal involving forged feasibility assessments. It had been banned from structuring legal guarantees in several jurisdictions. But none of these men seemed to know. Or worse, they did know and hoped no one else ever would. From her corner, Mira shifted her weight subtly, enough to see the contract again. The suspicious page lay innocently between authentic ones, its print alignment too perfect, its ink density slightly darker, its wording just vague enough to pass unnoticed by someone expecting everything to be in order. Additionally, another expert added, the acquisition terms ensure all downside risk is absorbed by a third party, an incredible advantage. Mira's pulse spiked. Absorbed by a third party? No. Redirected to the buyer through that fabricated clause. She remembered the structure. If certain conditions weren't met, conditions impossible to meet, the so-called guarantor would dissolve its obligations, forcing the buyer to absorb every loss. A trap disguised as protection. Khalid rubbed his jaw, staring at the ceiling as the expert spoke. Mira could see the subtle shift in his expression. A faint, almost imperceptible hesitation. Her earlier words had lodged somewhere in his mind, enough to disturb the rhythm of the negotiation. One advisor leaned toward him. "Sir, they've validated everything. There is no reason to delay." Mira swallowed, the familiar fear coiling in her chest. She had lived her entire life being told that experts knew better, that authority was unquestionable, that she should keep her head down and let systems operate as they were designed. But tonight she could see the system. And she could see the fracture running straight through it. The valuation specialist concluded with a flourish. "You are about to secure one of the most flawless acquisitions of the decade." Flawless. That word again. Mira's fingers tightened. The more perfectly something is presented, the more carefully you should look at its edges. The air in the suite thickened as the experts finished their polished assurances. Compliments, guarantees, perfect numbers, seamless structures. Their confidence swelled like a tide designed to drown doubt. Mira felt it pressing against her skin. She wasn't supposed to understand any of this. Not as a waitress, not as someone hired to refill glasses and disappear into the corners of wealthy rooms. But her training, the part of her life she had buried beneath exhaustion and debt, would not stay quiet. Her eyes kept drifting back to the altered page. 3 details screamed at her. 1. The ink density, the suspicious page's print, had a slightly raised texture. Too raised. Something you felt more than saw. Inkjet polymerization, a method often used for precise mimicry, but never for institutional contracts. 2. The micro-justification. The left margin alignment sat 0.7 millimeters inward. That seemed negligible to anyone else, but real legal documents followed strict alignment standards. A different machine had produced that page. 3. The syntax 1 phrase, contingent provisional sovereignty, didn't belong in modern contract language. It was an archaic construction she had studied back when she still believed she'd finish her degree. It originated from outdated agreements used to mask unilateral burden transfers. She blinked, heart pounding. Someone had deliberately buried this trap. Not sloppily, not carelessly, with intention, with skill. With the quiet cruelty of someone who assumed no one in the room could possibly recognize what had been done. And they would have been right. Except a former philology student, now a near-invisible server, had accidentally looked too closely. She tried to steady her breath, but fragments of her past pressed inward. Her scholarship interview, her professor's proud smile. The moment the funding disappeared, the eviction notice, the student loan collector who called her 3 times a day. The suffocating humiliation of trading academic brilliance for a rented uniform and a tray. She had tried so hard to disappear, but tonight the past she had failed to complete had followed her into this room. Khalid's advisor shifted restlessly. "We should move to signing," one insisted. "The experts have confirmed all aspects." Mira felt the walls closing around her. If she stayed silent, the billionaire would lose hundreds of millions, maybe more. If she spoke again, she could lose the job that was barely keeping her afloat. Her throat tightened. "You can't save anyone," she told herself. "Not him, not yourself, not with your words, not anymore." But then she lifted her eyes. The experts were smiling. The advisors were confident. The contract lay ready. And Mira realized something with cold clarity. No one in that room understood the danger, because no one else had been paying attention. Sometimes the worst traps survive because people are too impressed to question them. The presentation ended with a soft click, the projector fading into darkness. The sudden quiet was suffocating. Only the distant hum of the air system filled the luxurious suite. Advisors shuffled their papers. Experts closed their binders. Someone poured sparkling water with theatrical confidence. It was time to sign, and Mira felt her stomach collapse. Khalid's lacquered pen lay across the signature block, perfectly aligned as though placed with intention. One advisor nudged it closer to him, lowering his voice into something meant to sound prudent, but was really impatience disguised as concern. "Sir, the window is closing. The sellers expect confirmation tonight." Another added, "If you delay, they'll open bidding to competitors. You know how quickly restoration assets get swallowed by European funds." Their urgency filled the room like heat. Khalid didn't move. He stared at the contract with an expression Mira recognized. The look of a man who had been unshakably certain a moment ago, now unsettled by a single hairline crack he couldn't name. His eyes drifted toward her. Again. She forced herself not to react, not to speak, not to exist beyond her uniform. Her manager had once lectured her. The fastest way to get fired in luxury hospitality is to comment on what is not your business. She remembered nodding, promising, obeying. But now her pulse roared in her ears. The experts resumed their chorus. "Sir, we've performed full risk clearance. Every clause has been validated. This acquisition is strategically flawless. Flawless. Perfect. Rock solid." Words crafted to push his hand toward the paper. Mira pressed her back against the wall, hiding the tremor in her breathing. She could see the trap as clearly as if it were highlighted in neon. One clause, one syntactic relic, one page that didn't belong, a single flaw in the foundation, but enough to collapse a fortune. Her thoughts spiraled. If I speak, they'll humiliate me. If I speak, they'll fire me. If I speak, they might accuse me of interfering in a multi-million-dollar transaction. She had no protection, no degree, no legal status strong enough to withstand retaliation. And yet, silence felt like complicity. Khalid lifted the pen. The gold nib hovered over the signature line. Advisors leaned closer. Experts straightened their posture. Someone breathed out in relief. And for a moment, Mira imagined the ink hitting the paper. Imagined the trap springing shut. Imagined the look on his face when he realized too late what he had signed. Her fingertips tingled. Her throat tightened. She whispered inwardly, "Please, don't." But billionaires don't hear whispered prayers. He lowered the pen. Spectacular disasters are often seconds away from being sealed with a signature. The pen touched the paper. Not a signature, not yet, but the faintest contact, just enough for the gold nib to cast a thin, trembling shadow across the signature block. Advisors inhaled as if the deal had already materialized. Someone whispered congratulations under his breath. That was when Mira noticed something no one else had. A reflection. The chandelier's warm amber light glinted off the contract. But one page reflected the light differently. Not softly. Not with the matte absorption of archival fiber. It bounced back with a faint, unnatural sheen. Her breath caught. Gloss. Synthetic gloss. Not visible unless the light struck at exactly the right angle. And the angle had just arrived. She stepped forward instinctively, just a fraction, no more than the width of a breath, but enough that the nearest advisor snapped his head toward her. "Stay back," he hissed, annoyed. "Staff remain at the perimeter." She flushed with embarrassment and retreated a half step, but her eyes didn't move away from the page. That sheen validated everything she feared. The suspicious page wasn't just misaligned. It wasn't just printed differently. It wasn't just syntactically wrong. It had been inserted. She recognized the technique, a hybrid ink layering used to mimic offset printing. She had studied it once, years ago, in a seminar about historical document fraud. High-end imitators could make a page look authentic in dim light, but under strong amber illumination, the polymer waved back like a quiet confession. Her pulse hammered. The trap was real, engineered, deliberate. Khalid lowered the pen another millimeter. "Sir," an advisor urged, "we're ready." but his hesitation grew stronger. He glanced toward Mira again, almost involuntarily, as if waiting for something he couldn't articulate. A confirmation, a warning, a signal. She shook her head softly. So slightly no one else could have noticed. But he noticed. His brows tightened. "What's wrong?" one consultant asked. "Nothing." Another cut in quickly. "He's being thorough." "This is normal." No, nothing about tonight was normal. Mira felt a cold pressure behind her ribs. Her invisibility, once her shield, now trapped her. She knew exactly what would happen if he signed. The dissolved guarantor would default, the acquisition would implode, liabilities would reverse onto him, and the perfect deal would cannibalize his empire from the inside. A $240 million self-destruction, written in a single forged page. Her heart pounded, her breath turned thin, her palms slicked with fear. The nib hovered again, and for the first time since she had entered the room, Mira understood something terrifying. If she didn't speak, if she didn't step out of the shadows she had lived in for years, no one else would ever see what she saw. Everyone believes experts, until the truth comes from someone they weren't looking at. The gold nib descended, a single decisive stroke away from catastrophe. Mira didn't think. Her body moved before her fear could catch it. "Wait." The word left her lips like a fault line cracking open. Every head in the room snapped toward her. Her tray rattled from the tremor in her hands. The air tightened to a near breaking point. An advisor stepped forward, furious. "You are out of line. Staff do not interrupt." But Mira ignored him. She took one step closer to the table, not enough to challenge anyone, but enough to make her presence impossible to dismiss. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Sir, please don't sign yet." The suite froze. Khalid stared at her, eyes narrowing with a blend of irritation and curiosity. His advisors bristled, like a wall closing in. The experts exchanged looks, some annoyed, some confused, one suddenly pale. "Explain yourself," the billionaire said quietly. Her throat tightened. This was the moment that could cost her everything. I believe one page of the contract is incorrect." One advisor scoffed loudly. "You believe? Based on what? Your experience serving coffee?" Another chimed in. "Sir, she is imagining something. Remove her from the room." A third reached for his phone to call security. Mira inhaled. Her voice shook. But she didn't stop. "The page that lists the stability guarantor," she said, eyes locked on Khalid. "It doesn't match the others. Not in alignment, not in paper texture, not in syntactic structure." The room erupted. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is absurd. Sir, she's mistaken." But Khalid lifted one hand. Silence. He gestured toward her, studying the tension in her jaw, the fear pulsing in her breathing, the precise way she avoided looking at anyone but him. Not defiantly, but truthfully. "What did you see?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "The ink density is wrong," she whispered. The margins shift by less than a millimeter, but enough to show a different machine printed it. And the phrase on that page, the one describing the guarantor's contingent provisional sovereignty, that wording hasn't been used in legitimate contracts in decades. It's archaic and dangerous. One expert stiffened. Another advisor barked, "She's lying!" Khalid cut him off sharply. "Let her finish." Mira's breaths came faster. She felt exposed, fragile, on the verge of collapse. But she didn't stop. "That page was inserted," she said quietly. "I'm certain." A heavy silence fell. Khalid looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he suddenly realizes might be hiding a fire. "Show me," he said. The advisors exchanged panicked glances. The experts blanched. Mira hesitated, terrified, then stepped forward. her hand trembling as she reached for the document. Sometimes the smallest voice becomes the only barrier between ruin and reason. Mira approached the table like someone crossing a forbidden threshold. Her fingertips hovered above the contract, trembling, steadying, then finally lowering with the gentleness of someone touching something fragile, dangerous, and irreversible. She turned to the page she had seen earlier. Not the first page, not the signature block, the one buried deep inside the legal scaffolding. The page designed to vanish in plain sight. "This one," she said softly. Khalid leaned forward. The advisors crowded behind him. The experts stiffened, masks cracking at the edges. Mira inhaled and began. Not theatrically, not with confidence, but with precision. "The margin alignment is inconsistent." She pointed to the left edge. "Look here. Every page uses a standard 1.9 centimeter offset, but this page is 2.6. It's tiny, almost invisible, but margins follow rhythm. Contracts don't break rhythm." One advisor muttered, "Margins? Really? This is ridiculous." She ignored him. "The paper texture is synthetic." She angled the page toward the chandelier. The light bounced back sharply. "Archival fiber sheets absorb light. This one reflects it. That sheen only appears on polymer-coated composites, usually used for high-fidelity reproductions." Khalid's eyes narrowed. Mira continued before fear could silence her. "The ink density is raised." She brushed the edge of the text with her nail, gently, then placed the page between two genuine ones. "Feel the difference." The authentic pages were printed in a commercial offset batch. This one used layered polymerization. It builds micro-relief. You can detect it with a light touch. She didn't look up, didn't wait for approval. Her mind slipped fully into the world she had abandoned. The world where details mattered, where patterns told stories, where anomalies were revelations. She turned to the core of the trap. And the clause. Her voice thinned. She pointed to the archaic phrase. "Contingent provisional sovereignty." That term hasn't existed in legitimate contracts for decades. It was part of a legal structure used to create unilateral risk transfer, meaning the guarantor appears to absorb risk, but, under specific triggers, shifts all losses to the buyer. Khalid's jaw tightened. "Explain plainly." She met his eyes. "It means you would lose, even if you won, sir." Stunned silence. She continued, gathering the courage that had slept inside her for years. "The guarantor listed here dissolved 8 years ago. It has no legal capacity. So if revenue projections fail, or even if they succeed, but an audit triggers this clause, the guarantor defaults. And you become responsible for every liability. All of them." One advisor stepped forward, furious. "This is outrageous. She's overinterpreting." But the expert in the expensive suit blanched, sweating. Khalid caught the look. "You knew," he said coldly. The man stammered. "Sir, the structure is common." "It is not," Mira said softly. "Not with a dissolved guarantor. Not with a forged clause. And not with a syntactic relic that shouldn't exist in a contemporary legal document." The billionaire stared at the forged page as if it had personally insulted him. His advisors shifted uneasily. "Mira," he said slowly, "what happens if I sign this contract as it is?" She swallowed. "Your restoration conglomerate collapses within a year. The liabilities balloon. Your net worth plummets. Whoever orchestrated this gains control of the remaining assets because you would be forced to liquidate." The truth settled like a weight across the room. Someone had engineered a $240 million catastrophe, and only the waitress no one noticed had seen it coming. Sometimes a single flaw is enough to reveal the entire structure was designed to fail. Khalid didn't move. The forged page lay before him like a wound, its glossy sheen no longer subtle, no longer ignorable. His advisors watched him with tight jaws, as though willing him to dismiss everything he'd just heard. The experts, once confident, now looked like men hoping the lights would suddenly go out. "Turn the page," Khalid said quietly. Mira did. Her fingers trembled, but her mind was steady now, sharper than it had been in years. The next page was authentic. The one after that, too. She scanned them with quick, trained movements, searching not for what was wrong, but for what was missing. Then she found it. A paragraph, not forged, not inserted, but subtly edited, not by changing the wording, but by shifting a single reference point. "This," she whispered. Khalid leaned closer. "What am I looking at?" "The cross-reference," Mira said, pointing to a clause number. "This line is supposed to connect to Section 12B. It's standard in acquisition contracts. Section 12B defines the guarantor's obligations." "But here," she said, voice tightening, "it connects to Section 12C instead." The advisors exchanged confused glances. "That's nothing," one said quickly. "Just a typo." "No," Mira cut in softly but firmly. "It's deliberate." She traced the line. If Section 12B were referenced, the obligations would fall on the guarantor. But Section 12C shifts obligations onto the buyer under restructuring conditions. Khalid frowned. "Explain." "If revenue projections fluctuate by more than 8%, which most restoration sectors do, this clause activates. And it silently moves all debt and legal exposure to you." A whisper of horror spread across the room. "So even without the forged page," Khalid murmured. "You still lose," Mira finished. "The contract is designed so that even if you caught the forgery, the altered cross-reference ensures the same outcome." A legal architect finally spoke, voice thin. "Sir, this level tampering would require access to both the draft and the review pipeline. Someone inside the acquisition team—" Khalid slammed his palm on the table, making everyone jump. "Enough!" His voice was low, controlled, terrifying. He turned to Mira. "You saw both traps." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He leaned back slowly, breathing out through his nose, a man evaluating the wreckage of a deal that had almost destroyed him. His eyes drifted to the advisors, one of whom looked away too quickly. A realization formed in the billionaire's expression. Not rage. Not betrayal. Calculation. He looked back at Mira. "How long did it take you to see this?" he asked. "A moment," she whispered. The room seemed to tilt. The experts' faces drained of color. The advisors stiffened. A silent fury brewed behind the billionaire's eyes, not at her, but at the architecture of deceit laid before him. And Mira, standing in her wrinkled apron, realized something she had never expected. For the first time in years, someone was actually listening to her. Power is loud, but truth often arrives in a whisper no one expects. The luxurious suite no longer felt like a negotiation room. It felt like a crime scene. The forged page lay under the chandelier's light, like an exposed nerve. The altered cross-reference glared from the authentic pages with equal malice. And the silence that followed was no longer respectful. It was incriminating. Khalid rested both hands on the table, the slow, controlled breath of a man filtering shock through discipline. "Who prepared this contract?" he asked. The advisors stiffened. One cleared his throat. "Sir, the documents came directly from the acquisitions legal team." "Who handled the revisions?" Khalid repeated, colder. We all reviewed it." All lies have a sound. Mira heard it immediately. A tightness in their voices, a politeness too fast, a tone that reached for confidence but fell short. She stepped back, letting the billionaire's focus shift toward the men who had tried to usher his signature forward. They avoided his eyes. One, the valuation specialist, fidgeted with his cufflinks. The nervous tick of a man calculating whether to deny or escape. Khalid's voice dropped. Someone wanted me to sign a deal engineered to collapse. The youngest advisor snapped defensively. Sir, with respect, she is a waitress. Who caught what all of you missed? Khalid said sharply. The advisor recoiled, shame and anger warping his expression. The legal architect attempted a recovery. Sir, it's possible we received a compromised version, perhaps an external edit. Impossible, Mira said quietly. Everyone turned. She immediately regretted speaking, but the truth pushed forward anyway. This wasn't done by an outsider. The altered cross-reference aligns with internal formatting. Spacing, vocabulary, rhetorical style. It imitates your team's normal revisions. The legal architect's face blanched. The valuation specialist began sweating again. Someone's breath hitched. Khalid studied each of them in turn, slowly, deliberately, as though peeling away layers of performance. Tell me, he said to Mira without breaking eye contact with his advisors. What would have happened after I signed? Her voice was small but steady. You would submit this contract to the regulatory body. The guarantor would default within 48 hours. Liability transfer would activate immediately. The public discovery would follow. Markets would react. Lenders would call in covenants. You'd be forced to liquidate multiple assets to stabilize your position. She hesitated. And whoever orchestrated this would have bought your distressed assets for a fraction of their value. The billionaire's eyes darkened with comprehension. A takeover, silent, coordinated, elegant in its cruelty. The room felt colder. One advisor whispered, We had no idea. But Khalid saw through him now. Intent reveals itself in who speaks too quickly. He pushed the contract aside, its pages fanning like a wounded bird. Bring me the entire revision history, he ordered. No one moved. His voice sharpened. Now. The advisors scrambled. Mira stepped back again, wishing she could vanish into the wall. She had not meant to expose a conspiracy. She had not meant to defy hierarchy, wealth, or power. She had only meant to prevent a disaster. But disasters rarely come alone. They drag their architects into the light. She exhaled shakily. Sometimes the truth doesn't break a room. It freezes it and waits. The advisors returned with tablets, binders, revision logs, anything that might soften the blow of accountability. But the look in Khalid's eyes made it clear. Nothing would soften it. Put everything on the table, he ordered. They obeyed. Digital files lit up, screens reflected on the polished walnut. Pages fanned open. The revision history, normally a dull administrative trail, now pulsed like the forensic heartbeat of a crime. Mira stayed back, hands clasped behind her apron. Watching the unraveling like someone witnessing an avalanche she accidentally triggered. Khalid gestured. You, he said to the youngest advisor, the one who had spoken too quickly, defended too aggressively. Explain why half of the draft revisions originate from your login. The advisor froze. That's standard, he stammered. Mira shook her head gently. His edits don't match the language of the earlier drafts. Khalid glanced toward her, signaling she should continue. She stepped closer reluctantly, pointing at the revision panel on the screen. Contracts maintain internal linguistic consistency, word choice, clause rhythm, transitional phrasing. She motioned to the suspicious entries. These revisions mimic your firm's style, but imperfectly. Whoever made them didn't understand how your templates actually evolve. Khalid's attention sharpened. And the forged page, he asked. Mira pointed again. It was uploaded after midnight. The timestamp is masked, but the system logs connection metadata. The document was inserted from an internal network, specifically from this advisor's credentials. The room fractured. The accused advisor's face turned chalk white. "That's impossible," he whispered. "My credentials were secure." Khalid's voice dropped dangerously. "Were they?" The valuation specialist finally broke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Khalid pivoted. "You knew." I suspected," the man stuttered. "But I didn't see the forged page. I thought it was just an aggressive restructuring deal." Mira studied him. "No," she said quietly. "You knew exactly. You recognized the dissolved guarantor, didn't you?" He swallowed hard. No denial came. The legal architect exhaled shakily, rubbing his forehead. "Sir, this could only happen with access to both your private draft folder and the seller's data room. Someone coordinated this from inside." Khalid looked at the young advisor again. Not with anger now, but with a colder calculation. "You stood to gain." The advisor trembled. "Sir, listen, I was approached. I didn't think they'd actually execute the collapse clause. They said it was a restructuring tactic." Mira flinched at the word. Restructuring? The euphemism used when someone intends to dismantle a life quietly. Khalid rose slowly from his chair. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply stared at the men who had nearly destroyed him. "This was an attempt at forced acquisition," he said, "a hostile takeover disguised as incompetence." No one answered. He looked at Mira. "You exposed everything." Her cheeks burned with fear, with disbelief, with the surreal realization that her voice, the one she spent years suffocating, had shattered a $240 million trap designed by people far more educated, powerful, and protected than she was. Khalid's advisors could no longer meet her eyes. Truth is quiet. Guilt is loud. The temperature in the suite seemed to drop as the truth settled, not with a dramatic crash, but with a suffocating stillness. The accused advisor stood rigid, sweating through his tailored shirt. The valuation specialist avoided everyone's eyes. The legal architect whispered into his tablet, likely already drafting a statement of professional distance. Khalid remained standing, unmoving, unreadable. "Leave the room," he said. The words were soft, deadly. All three compromised experts froze. Now! Their departure was not graceful. Papers scattered, a binder fell. The valuation specialist muttered an apology no one believed. The accused advisor hesitated for a single foolish second, the brief pause of someone thinking he might salvage a fraction of dignity. But Khalid looked at him once, and the man fled. The door shut behind them with a muted click that sounded almost ceremonial. Only 4 people remained: Khalid, 2 loyal advisors, and Mira. The billionaire faced the glass wall, looking out at the city, its lights shimmering like 1,000 whispered lies. He inhaled deeply, the slow, measured breath of a man recalibrating the shape of his world. "Do you understand," he said without turning, "that they nearly dismantled my entire legacy?" Mira lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir." He turned back to her. "And do you understand that none of my experts, none of my directors, none of my legal teams noticed what you did?" She didn't answer. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. One of the remaining advisors spoke cautiously. "Sir, this could be contained. If we isolate the revision log, restore the original files." Khalid cut him off. "This is not about containment." His gaze returned to Mira. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything they altered." She hesitated, not out of fear this time, but disbelief that she was being asked. "Here," she whispered, stepping to the table. She flipped through the pages, identifying subtle edits with quiet, precise motions. "This reference chain is broken. It's designed to reroute liability. This clause was duplicated, then modified. This header spacing was shifted. None of it matches the original structure." The advisor leaned in, stunned. "How can you see all of that?" Mira didn't answer. Because the truth was painful. Because she had spent years training for a world she never got to join. Because linguistic and forensic analysis had been her dream before debt buried it. Because invisibility had become her survival strategy, not her choice. Khalid watched her closely. "You were never a waitress," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I am now," she whispered. He shook his head once, slowly. "No. You are something else entirely." Mira stepped back, hands clasped tightly to hide the tremor. She wished she could shrink again, disappear into shadows. But the room had already shifted around her. The billionaire no longer saw a server. He saw the person who had saved him from a financial weapon disguised as paperwork. Truth, once revealed, cannot be unseen, nor can the person who reveals it. For the first time since the chaos began, the suite felt almost unbearably quiet. The city lights pressed against the glass, blinking like curious spectators. Mira stood frozen near the table, the forged page still reflecting the chandelier above her like a guilty mirror. Khalid studied her in a way that made her feel exposed, not dismissed, not diminished, but seen. It was terrifying. "Sit," he said gently. She shook her head quickly. "I can't, sir. It wasn't a request." One of the remaining advisors pulled out a chair. Mira sat on the edge of it, back straight, hands tightly folded. She had never occupied a seat in a room like this. Her uniform suddenly felt too small for her body. Khalid lowered himself into the chair across from her, folding his hands. "You saved me," he said. "Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally." Mira's throat tightened. "I just saw something and spoke." "No," he corrected softly. "You saw everything. They spent months engineering this trap. They structured a collapse so precise my entire board would have accepted it as inevitable. And you dismantled it in minutes." She swallowed, unsure how to hold the weight of his words. One advisor stepped forward. "Sir, we can still bring in external auditors. Confirm her observations officially." "She is the audit," Khalid said flatly. The advisor stepped back. Mira blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. "I didn't mean to interfere," she whispered. "I know my place. I know I shouldn't have—" He leaned closer. "Your place," he said, "is not where they put you." Her breath stalled. "You saw the structure. The linguistic fingerprints. The synthetic ink. You identified two separate traps, each designed to function even if the other was caught." He tapped the forged page. "That requires mastery, not luck." She stared at her hands, cheeks warming. These men were used to power. She was used to hiding from it. "I only acted because it was wrong," she murmured. Khalid nodded slowly. "Most people see wrong and step away from it. You stepped toward it." "Why?" She looked up, startled by the softness in his tone. The billionaire leaned back, evaluating her with the kind of attention usually reserved for rare discoveries. "I will dismantle every part of this scheme," he said. "The people behind it, the internal collaborators, the external beneficiaries, all of it." Her chest tightened with a different kind of fear. "I don't want trouble, sir. Please don't involve me." He shook his head. "You won't be involved. I'll handle the accountability." She exhaled shakily, but then he added quietly, "You, Mira, will not return to the dining floor." The words landed like a blow. Her stomach twisted. Fired? Punished? Removed? She stared at him. Khalid continued, "You will stay in this room tonight while we finalize every safeguard. Tomorrow morning, you will join my forensic review division." Her mouth parted in shock. I can't. I'm not." "You are," he said. "In every way that matters." Her vision blurred for a second. She had tried so hard to bury the part of herself that once dreamed of this work. "Why me?" she whispered. Khalid lifted the forged page between two fingers. "Because only one person in this building saw the truth," he said, "and it was you." Her breath trembled. Sometimes a single moment forces the world to return, someone to the place they were always meant to stand. The advisors left briefly to coordinate the immediate lockdown of all contract channels. The room, once crowded with voices and polished confidence, shrank into an intimate electric silence. Only Mira and the billionaire remained seated at the long oval table. The forged page lay exactly where she had exposed it, a quiet monument to the disaster that never happened. Khalid watched her with a steadiness that made her pulse flutter in her throat. "You are overwhelmed," he said. She nodded, a small, raw gesture. Overwhelmed wasn't enough. She felt unmoored, as if her life had slipped off its rails and was now drifting into territory she didn't know how to survive. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I'm not qualified for any of this." He raised a brow. "You identified a dual-layered financial collapse mechanism designed by people with six-figure retainers." "That was an accident," she insisted. No accident could see that much. Her breath hitched. He didn't understand. He couldn't. She wasn't a prodigy. She was someone who had failed. Someone life had pushed so far down, she no longer recognized the person she used to be. "You don't know my situation," she murmured. "You don't know how much I've lost." "Then tell me." She froze. No one of his status had ever asked her anything that personal, and meant it. "My scholarship collapsed," she said quietly. "I lost my visa status. I took the first job I could get. I've been hiding." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want anyone to know I failed." Khalid's expression shifted. Not pity, not condescension, but something closer to recognition. "You didn't fail," he said. "You were buried." A breath escaped her. A small, fragile thing. He continued, "There are institutions full of people who study what you just did tonight. And none of them could have done it as fast. You have a mind trained for forensic linguistics, systems analysis, structural integrity. Whether you finished a degree or not." She shook her head. "Even if that were true, sir, you can't just pull someone like me into your division. I have no credentials, no standing, no protection." "Then I'll give you all three," he said simply. Her chest tightened with a different kind of fear, an unfamiliar, destabilizing hope. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I step out of the dining room, I lose the little security I have. If I make a mistake—" "You won't," he said. "And even if you did, you would make fewer than those men I paid millions to advise me." A tiny, bitter laugh almost escaped her. The truth of it stung. Khalid leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You saw a trap that was invisible by design. You saw it because you live in a world where missing a detail costs you everything. That is not weakness. It is the sharpest form of intelligence." She looked away, blinking rapidly. Her entire life she had been told to stay silent, stay grateful, stay small. Now in a single night, someone was offering her the opposite. Visibility, trust, responsibility. It terrified her. "Why me?" she asked again, softer this time. He answered without hesitation. "Because the person who sees danger first is the only one who can protect what matters." Mira inhaled shakily, the weight of the choice pressing against her ribs. She had been invisible for so long, she had forgotten there were other ways to live. Sometimes the scariest moment isn't falling. It's realizing the world is finally willing to catch you. The suite felt different now. Not hostile, not chaotic, but suspended, as though time had paused to watch what Mira would choose. The forged contract, once the center of the storm, lay untouched on the table. Outside the glass wall, the city shimmered, unaware that the fate of a billionaire and of the invisible woman who saved him had shifted in a single night. Two senior advisors returned quietly, their expressions carefully composed. "Sir," one said, "the revision logs have been secured. The compromised staff have been locked out of all systems. Your legal director is requesting instructions at dawn." "Dawn will come soon enough," Khalid replied without looking at them. His attention remained on Mira. She felt it like warmth and pressure at once. One advisor approached her with a tablet. "Miss, we need your statement for the internal report." Khalid raised a hand. "She will give no statement tonight. She gives nothing until she has counsel and protection." The advisor stepped back immediately. Protection. The word landed in Mira's chest like something she had never been allowed to own. She rose from her chair instinctively, but her legs were unsteady. She wasn't used to being the center of gravity in a room like this. She wasn't used to being treated as someone whose knowledge mattered. Khalid stood as well. "You exposed an attempted financial ambush," he said. "Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head. "It means someone will try to bury this. To bury me. And if I'm not careful, to bury you too." Her breath stalled. Fear flared. She wasn't built for political warfare. She wasn't built for corporate vendettas. She was a linguist who never got the chance to become one. A woman who had been surviving at the lowest rung of the ladder for years. She whispered, "Maybe it's better if I go back to being no one." His eyes hardened. No one just prevented a $250 million collapse. No one outperformed every expert in the room. No one saved my name, my company, and my future. He stepped closer. "You are not no one. Not after tonight." She swallowed, her voice fragile and thin. "What if I'm not ready? You are? How do you know?" He picked up the forged page between two fingers. "Because the people trying to deceive me feared someone exactly like you. Someone quiet. Someone observant. Someone they underestimated so completely they didn't bother to hide their weakest seams." Her eyes filled, not with pride, but something gentler, more dangerous. Possibility. One advisor approached cautiously. "Sir, should we prepare her onboarding documents?" The billionaire didn't answer immediately. He watched Mira, really watched her, as though waiting for her to breathe a decision into existence. She curled her fingers into her palm, grounding herself the way she had in every moment of fear. Tonight, the gesture meant something else. Not hiding, not retreating, steadying. "I'll do it," she whispered. Khalid nodded once, not victorious, not triumphant, but with an odd solemnity. Then everything changes. Mira looked at the forged page one last time. Truth turns the world slowly at first, then all at once. The office wasn't large, and she loved that about it. A single window overlooking the courtyard of the Institute. A walnut desk worn at the edges. Shelves lined with case files she had reviewed, corrected, protected. Mira sat alone in the soft morning light, a cup of tea warming her hands, her ID badge resting against her collar. Forensic Language and Contract Analysis Division, Senior Analyst. A year ago, she would have laughed at the impossibility of it. A year ago, she was invisible. A year ago, a forged page nearly erased a man's legacy. And nearly erased her too. Now people asked for her judgment. Now they waited for her to speak. Now her quiet, meticulous way of seeing the world was no longer a burden. It was her strength. She had stability. She had dignity. She had become the person she once believed life had taken from her. Every so often, she crossed paths with Khalid. Brief meetings, polite nods, the unspoken acknowledgement that fate had twisted strangely in their favor the night she interrupted a signature. And sometimes, when she walked through the Institute's corridors, she remembered the dining suite on the 42nd floor. That moment when a whisper became the hinge on which two futures turned. She smiled. Small details save worlds.